if Einstein is right, if general relativity is correct, then universe is expanding, yes?
Yes.
Okay, so if you reverse time, then the universe is getting smaller.
All right.
So, what if I reverse the process all the way back to see what happened at the beginning of time itself?
At the beginning of time itself?
Yes. So the universe getting smaller and smaller, getting denser and denser, hotter and hotter as we...
You mean wind back the clock?
Exactly, wind back the clock.
Wind back the clock.
The Theory of Everything is the film, and I'm here with one of the main players of the ensemble. Hello, Eddie Redmayne.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm really good. How are you?
How much did you know about Stephen Hawking beforehand?
Do you know, I was pretty ignorant.
Since you went to the same university.
I know. Do you know, I'd been at Cambridge, and occasionally you'd see him across the campus, and he would be there, often flanked by his carers, and you would hear snippets of his iconic voice, and I knew he had done stuff to do with black holes, but I gave up science when I was about 14. So basically everything about this film was a revelation for me, and as I started to research him, and then finally was lucky enough to meet him, he's just incredibly funny. And one of the things I loved about the script is it had such humour and like vibrancy to it, and that's something that Stephen has in spades.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because it could very easily be a film that could be mawkish, given how serious his condition is and the path that their relationship takes. But the humour that was in it, I mean, this is kind of tangential, but Stephen Hawking once did the voice of the computer Deep Thought in a kind of doc of Hitchhiker's Guide, where I was playing Arthur Dent. And then you add to that the fact that he's been on The Simpsons and he was in Star Trek Next Generation.
Exactly.
And you kind of go, actually, he is quite funny.
Oh, he's brilliantly funny.
But you said that you met him. Did you meet him before you started filming?
I did. So I met him about 5 days before we started filming. And by that point, I'd spent 4 months sort of researching him and researching everything about him. And he's an incredibly busy man, solving some quite intense problems out there in the universe. So his schedule was quite insane. So I could only meet him those few days before. And what was complicated is because we weren't shooting the film chronologically, so I was playing him from different periods in his life over the same day of filming, is I'd had to sort of plan out in some ways what the arc of the character would be. And the fear when I met him was, what if I've got it completely wrong? I've only got sort of 2 days or 3 days to sort it out. And so when I met him, I was nervous enough as it was. And when you speak to him now, there's a very sort of unique rhythm. There are long, long pauses. It takes him a while to speak. And I have a sort of weird the hatred of silence. And so I basically just proceeded to spew forth information about Stephen Hawking to Stephen Hawking for about 45 minutes. It was verging on the horrific. He was sort of looking at me going, yes, I do know about myself. But I calmed down, and he was just brilliant. He was witty, had this razor wit and a sense of mischief, a kind of anarchic quality that was wonderful.
Did he give you any? Did he ask you any questions at that point about how you were going to portray him? Or
I mean, he did. He asked me if I was playing him before the voice machine, and I said yes. And he then said my voice was very slurred, and it was interesting because at that time there is one documentary of Stephen when he was speaking, and his voice is almost incomprehensible.
That's when someone's translating for him.
Exactly, exactly that. And I had wanted to go that far because all the work I was doing before, the stuff I was portraying him before, that was a sort of educated guess. But suddenly I had something to actually, that I knew was true. And the producers were a little worried about having subtitles in the film, so they didn't want me to go that far. So I said this to Steve, and he said, well, could you not have someone translate me? Which was what happened. So Jane, his wife, would translate him, or his students. If you wanted to be one of Stephen's students, you went and spent a couple of weeks learning to lip read and understand him. And so when Stephen said that to me, I kind of could take that back to James, the director, and Anthony wove in some scenes, Anthony, the writer, in which Jane does translate Stephen so that we could get at least closer to, because that was the one thing he really cared about.
The fact that we don't, I mean, at least I haven't seen, there isn't documentary footage available of his actual voice. How did you go about finding tonally his voice?
What his voice, I mean, what I did was just read. I mean, there's so much material in the sense that there is Jane's book she wrote, which the film is based on. There are also friends of his that one could talk to, but also it's an educated guess. I mean, the thing about this film is it's absolutely not a documentary. It's one does as much research as you can, and really you try to educate yourself, and then you kind of have to at some point make a wee leap. So I don't know if I got his early voice right at all.
Well, hey, it's good enough for me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, apparently, and also good enough for him. Didn't he say that he, after seeing the film, that at times he thought it was himself up there?
I did. I heard that, which frankly was the greatest review of my life, and I might never work again. I might just retire. But it was the stakes for Felicity, and I felt so high from the second we were cast that actually we hadn't even realised it, but we've been walking around with sort of hunched up shoulders for sort of 9 months, and just before I saw Stephen, just before he went to see the film, and I said, Stephen, I'm really nervous, but let me know what you think. And he took a while to respond, and then he said, in his iconic voice, he said, "I will let you know what I think, good or otherwise."
Wow.
And I was like, okay, Stephen, if it's otherwise, maybe you could just stick to otherwise. We don't need the intricacies of everything I got wrong. But no, so when he was nice about the film, it meant the world.
It must be kind of, it strikes me, I've never played anyone who has been real and living. Was that a particular challenge? That must have been, was that in the back of your head all the time?
It was definitely in the back of your head, was the fact that you knew he was going to see it and give it the ultimate review. But there were so many things with this film about, I wanted to pick the science correctly. I met maybe over a 4-month period 30 or 40 people suffering from MND, motor neuron disease, and their families, and they were so generous to us that you felt a huge responsibility to the illness. And then, of course, to Stephen and to making an entertaining film. That's the other. And so there were enough things to generally keep us on our toes that it all sort of ended up blurring to one sort of white noise of trepidation.
That's great. White noise of trepidation is
there you
something
go.
that I can relate to. But he also visited set as well, as did Jane.
Yeah.
Is that right? I can't think of anything more terrifying.
Well, I could tell you, Stephen's entrance was unlike anything I've ever seen. Jane, Jonathan, the family are so wonderful, and they all came this one evening, and we were doing a May ball scene, and there was this huge fireworks display, and the producers had bought 3 sets of fireworks because fireworks are pretty pricey, so we only had 3 takes of it, and that meant that everyone was a wee bit nervous about that, and then on cue, Stephen arrived, flanked by his nurses, spotlit by his computer screen, and literally on cue, the fireworks went off, and I describe it as the great rock star entrance. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. But that night, Jane and Jonathan were on one side of our eye line, and Stephen and his carers were on the other side, and Felicity and I Felicity Jones, who plays Jane, we just clung together, sort of trying to hope we weren't being judged too much.
She's terrific in this.
She's
Felicity, as is, Simon McBurney, Emily Watson, David Thewlis, who I think is great.
Oh, he's so lovely.
Maxim Peake is great. It is quite an amazing little ensemble. Now, obviously, there's already been a lot of talk about. Now, I hope you don't take this the wrong way.
Yeah.
There were times in this film where I forgot what you look like.
Oh, I hope the right. That's amazing.
I'm
Thank you.
glad. And because then I remember the last time I felt that was seeing you in The Yellow Handkerchief.
Oh wow.
Where I forgot what you look like. Now, the interesting thing about the transformation that you have to make physically, there's no kind of prosthetics or anything, is there?
No, there were prosthetics in the last 2 scenes of the film when he's much older. But generally, it was clever sort of little makeup things, but really about manipulating my face to do things that perhaps we don't do normally.
But in terms of the physicality of this, because that's the thing that, again, as another actor, I'd kind of go, well, that's, to me, making that real is the biggest challenge, and particularly charting it. I mean, you talked earlier about the arc, and particularly shooting out of sequence. Did you have a system for kind of then knowing where you would be?
Yeah, what I did is because there's no documentary footage of Stephen before he's in the wheelchair that I could find, I basically took as many photographs as I could to the Queen Square Neurology Clinic, and there's a specialist there called Dr. Katie Seidel, and she would look at the photos, and by analysing the photos would tell me what she thought Stephen's specific progression could have been. So I then basically charted through, on a piece of paper, which muscles went when, as it were.
Wow.
And then I worked with a dancer, a choreographer called Alex Reynolds, and Alex basically helped me train the muscles to be able to sustain these positions for extended takes. But also, I tried to learn the different stages of physicality like a dance, because when you learn a dance, to begin with, I'm a shoddy dancer, and when I start, all you're thinking about is what your feet are doing. But once you really know it, you can then be expressive within the confines of the dance. And I tried to learn the physicalities like that, so that when it came to playing with Felicity, we could just play the human story. Because the most important thing for me is that when you meet Stephen, the illness couldn't be less interesting to him. He's someone that lives passionately and fully. And similarly, when I read the script, the script didn't seem like a film about a physicality or an illness. It felt like a human story, and I wanted to make sure that.
I have to say, I mean, it's something that the film left me with was that, so much of what we regard as our dignity is tied in with our physicality.
Interesting.
That looking at what happens when you strip that dignity away and what you can do with what's left was the most powerful thing for me, because I just wondered whether there was something that surprised you in his story within that. I mean, the other thing, let me put it another way. As an actor, you kind of try to look for what you Venn diagram with a character. So what did you Venn diagram with Stephen Hawking? What do you have in common?
For me, there were so many elements to him. Whether it was the specifics of the science, whether it was, the disease, but also really it was about his personality. And when I met him, it was his force of it was the mischief, this Lord of Misrule thing that really was overwhelming. And I realised that what was really important is, however much technical work you do, is that James, our director, comes from a documentary background, and he wanted to be able to film us improvising and being free, and I just needed to, rather than isolating all those things that technically, was make sure they were just totally melded in a way in which there was a freedom to it.
Did you stay in character on a given day? I mean, would you break for lunch or?
No, I didn't. But also because we were playing Stephen in different stages during the day, I just sort of there was so many sort of technical demands of taking off this wig and changing this makeup and putting on different that it was sort of almost impossible. But I did try, and if I was in a physicality for a specific period of time in the day, I would try and stay in that. But
and did you have, in terms of getting into character, did you have a mantra? Did you listen to music? Did you have pictures that you looked at?
I had a couple of pictures. Yeah, I had 3 pictures in my trailer, which one was that famous photo of Einstein with his tongue out.
Oh yeah.
And the second was James Dean. Oh, weirdly, because when you look at Stephen when he's younger, he has this kind of dishevelled confidence and kind of this cool, which is effortless, and he's a ladies' man as well. There was that sort of, and then the last was a picture of a Joker in a pack of cards with a puppet, with a marionette, because that Lord of Misrule idea, the anarchic thing, but also the power. Like when he's in a room, he absolutely controls the room, and you really feel that with him. And so that kind of capricious quality was important.
That's fantastic summing up. 3 pictures that sum up Stephen Hawking. That's extraordinary.
Well, I don't know. I don't think I'd like to tell Stephen that. These are the 3 photos that sum you up.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.